status of Puerto Rico's electrical infrastructure, including the privatization of the transmission and distribution system from PREPA to LUMA Energy and the transition toward renewable energy. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearing are limited to the chair and the ranking minority member or their designee. This will allow us to hear from our witnesses sooner and help members keep to their schedules. I therefore ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today or at the close of the hearing, and whichever of those comes first. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Without objection, the chair will also declare a recess subject to the call of the chair. And also without objection, Representative Torres, Representative Ocasio-Cortez, Representative Price, and Representative Espaillat are authorized to question the witnesses at today's hearing. As described in the notice, statements, documents, or motion must be submitted to the electronic repository at hnrc.docs@mail.house.gov. Additionally, please note that with in-person meetings, members are responsible for their own microphones. As with our in-person meetings, members can be muted by staff only to avoid inadvertent background noise. Finally, members or witnesses experiencing technical problems should inform committee staff immediately. The chair now recognizes for their opening statement the vice-ranking minority member for Insular Affairs for any statement that the member would like to make. Just so recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member Westerman, for the opportunity to have this very timely hearing. I also want to recognize the witnesses who have responsibly come before us. The hearing is timely because over the summer, Puerto Rico has faced extreme instability of the power supply, with widespread prolonged power interruptions due to a near collapse of the generation fleet in hands of PREPA, the state-owned utility. As of last Sunday morning, only 38% of its nominally operational baseload and 42% of its peaker and backup capacities were available for dispatch. That means that altogether, running even with the backups is still nearly 1,000 megawatts short of estimated daily load. That is also almost the full capacity of the two base load private generators. So if we see that the whole system will barely meet demand, and any spike could bring it down, plus that is being done by keeping our units online and that are known to require repair or are past due, way past due for maintenance, creating a time bomb. Because of that, this is why much the all installed capacity is now unavailable. This also created a paradox that since it's increased costs on both PREPA and the distribution operator LUMA, it means consumers see the bills go up when they're not getting even electricity. 4 years after Hurricane Maria, 1 year since the obligation of over $10 billion in different funds, federal funds, to build back better grid, 3 months later, after a much proclaimed contract of transmission and distribution, this has ended people's patience. How long this is going to happen? LUMA and PREPA must answer that question. Explain what is happening, what is going to be done in short term and long term, and how are they preparing to build back better. The people of Puerto Rico want their power to be on today, not just thinking about the future, and the cost to stop rising, and accountability for what happens. Not just great plans about the future, the greatest plans that they're going to be installing. We want to see service improve now and then. If anyone is objectively failing, then take the needed steps to provide under the law and contracts to rectify that. It worries me if this hearing instead revolves around ideological position of blaming privatization itself. That will be based on a demand that contracts must be rejected just because they should be, and then we should take FEMA rebuilding funds and forbid them from being used for anything other than someone's favorite alternative. I think we should be more precise on this. We support having community renewables and distributed generation microgrids in Puerto Rico's recovery. And these are tools for resiliency as self-reliance itself. But again, renewable energy plan in Puerto Rico is already very ambitious, with goals of 50% by 2030, 100% by 2050. And now we just got 2% of renewables. If that is achievable under the current parameters, great. If not, we need to discuss now what are the necessary steps to get there. And in order to that for happening, we must first and foremost provide the people of Puerto Rico now an energy supply that is affordable for the consumer, reliable for both base loads and peak loads for the private sector as well. Our manufacturing industry is important and they cannot operate just with batteries. So resilient in case of a natural disaster or infrastructure mishap, and compliant with all environmental and public health requirements. We cannot do that if we exclude upfront resources like LNG, which I support, or if we rush plants closings that are already programmed to happen before the new grid is already ready. I hope this hearing provide better guidance to all of us in addressing these issues, in answering what's going to happen when the people of Puerto Rico are going to have power, and when PREPA is going to submit to FEMA all the necessary documents to get the federal funds that are available from last year. With that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Thank you. And the full committee ranking member, Mr. Westerman, do you wish to make a statement? Hearing no response, let me say my opening statement. You know, the committee is meeting today to hear from a number of witnesses regarding the status of privatization of management of Puerto Rico's electric grid from the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, PREPA, to LUMA Energy. We will also hear about the authority's plans to spend an estimated $9.5 billion of federal cost share for the reconstruction of the island's electrical infrastructure, which was destroyed by Hurricanes Irma and Maria almost exactly 4 years ago. This hearing is indeed timely, as Representative Gonzalez Colon mentioned and said in her statement, in part because of the recent changes that have taken place at PREPA, with the resignation of PREPA board chair as well as the utilities executive director. It is more likely the case than not, that these changes in PREPA's leadership were due to a recent spate of widespread power outages on the island that has understandably left the island residents very angry, especially since the LUMA contract was supposed to improve service. Why are so many power outages happening now, and what are their causes? Are they because of lack of maintenance at the power generation plants, or because of poor vegetation control or lack of proper consultation with PREPA by LUMA on proper load management? Do these and other problems stem from the shortage of experienced workers at LUMA, who know the system and can anticipate where the hiccups are likely to occur? We intend to receive answers to these and other questions. I am hopeful that many of them can be answered today from our diverse group of witnesses, including representatives of the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau, which is tasked by law with overseeing operations at PREPA, including the LUMA Managed Transmission and Distribution System. The last time this committee held a hearing on PREPA, I said that my primary goal was to determine the best way to guarantee that PREPA can be rebuilt so that it withstand future extreme weather, provide the people of Puerto Rico with reliable, inexpensive power, and prevent the displacement of its workers. In many ways, this remains my chief concern as we convene this hearing today. When I visited Puerto Rico 2 years ago and met with PREPA officials, I raised with them a number of concerns I heard at the time about their privatization plan. These concerns, which I also heard from various stakeholders on the island, were that their plan lacked transparency and stringent contract monitoring and oversight requirements which are needed to instill confidence in the process. In many ways, I'm still hearing those same concerns expressed today. Finally, I must repeat my many calls as echoed by the PREPA Integrated Resource Plan and Act 17 for renewables to quickly become the energy source for the island so that the cost of producing power and its reliability can be reduced for the ratepayers. Even though Puerto Rico Act 17 calls for PREPA to increase its renewable portfolio by 40% by 2025, 60 by 2040, and 100% by 2050, ongoing foot dragging in the implementation of the law, as well as the IRP made it unlikely that these renewable energy goals will be met. PREPA and LUMA need to move more aggressively to comply with IRP and Puerto Rico law. If they don't, the people of Puerto Rico are going to pay the price. I regret that LUMA backed out at the last minute from our oversight hearing on coal power plant on the island a few months ago. Attending today was the right decision. I want to thank our witnesses for being here, and I look forward to hearing the testimony, and I yield back. Let me now turn to our witnesses, and I will introduce each witness. Let me remind the witnesses that under our committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. When you begin, the timer will begin and it will turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining. I recommend that members and witnesses join remotely using grid view so that they may pin the timer to their screen. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute yourself to avoid any inadvertent background noise, and I will also allow the entire panel to testify before questioning begins. The chair now recognizes our first witness, Mr. Fernando Gil, President, Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, PREPA Governing Board. Mr. Gil, welcome, and the time is yours. You're recognized, Mr. Gil?
Internally, nonetheless, it's like we're not seeing it on the screen right now, but nonetheless, I will continue with my or start my statement as soon as you confirm me that or.
I can see you, sir.
Okay, sir. So if I can start right now, I will. And
Please,
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
For 5 minutes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Grijalva, Ranking Member Westerman, and member of the committee, and to our resident Commissioner, Congresswoman Gonzalez. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the status of the ongoing transformation of the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority and Puerto Rico Electric Grid. As you know, my name is Fernando Gil, and I'm recently appointed Chairman of PREPA Governing Board, alongside his engineer, Josue Colon Ortiz, who was appointed Executive Director on September 29 of 2021. PREPA continues to face difficult challenges, nonetheless is undergoing a fundamental transformation as required by Puerto Rico law, conducting the most ambitious program to procure renewable resources currently being pursued anywhere in the United States. At the same time, PREPA has transitioned to its management agent, LUMA, the responsibility for operation and maintenance of its transmission and distribution systems in accordance with the mandates of Act 17. We're making changes intended to improve our performance, and among these are senior level management change, power plants needs assessment, and asset management strategies, among others. The recent transition of PREPA transmission and distribution system to LUMA was complex. It requires the transfer of large number of employees from PREPA to LUMA and the cutover of billing systems and call centers. LUMA took over the transmission and distribution system along with the generation dispatch on June 1st, according to plan. Unfortunately, there have been system problems since the transfer. Among these were substation fires caused by failure of outmoded equipment and other customer outages that were not related to the transition. I should stress that no PREPA employee who was in good standing as of June 1st was terminated because of the transition. All PREPA employees whose functions were being transferred to LUMA under the agreement were either given the opportunity to move to LUMA or being in agencies in the government of Puerto Rico. Prior to the transition of PREPA, PREPA had 5,321 employees. As of June 8, LUMA recruited around 1,190 PREPA employees, and currently PREPA staff is of 1,260. PREPA generation fleet, as you know, is old, outmoded, inefficient, and expensive to run. Under PREPA approved integrated resource plan, most of the fleet will be retired over the next 10 years as we transition to renewable generation and energy storage per public policy mandate. PREPA suffered a large number of generating facilities outages in late August and through September. They had a variety of causes, but many has to do with the advanced age of our fleet. PREPA's new baseload units are 25 years old, and the rest average is 40 years old. PREPA's ability to expend funds of maintenance and upgrades has been constrained by debt restructuring process, as Title III of PROMESA, liquidity challenges, and the need to address damages resulting from hurricanes and earthquakes. The execution of maintenance and repair work has also been affected by the measures required in response to COVID-19 pandemic. The most significant outage involved the Costa Sur generation station on August 22nd. A transmission line fault led to voltage fluctuations that affect generating facilities in the south, including Costa Sur. Those fluctuations forced Costa Sur Unit 6 offline and damaged a steam turbine rotor. Repairs took several months, and and Costa Sur Unit 5 suffered a rupture in its boiler, and it was taken out of service on September 13 for repairs. Welding works for repairs and subsequent steam line failure was completed early this week. The Palo Seco generating station had experienced several events. Unit 3 suffered boiler ruptures on August 31st and September 6th and was limited over September 25th and 26th weekend due to the malfunctions of the cooling tower system. This unit tripped again on September 27th due to a broken economizer. The Unit 3 repairs have been completed, and Palo Seco Unit 4 was offline on September 11th and 12th because of water chemistry issues and was again offline on September 28th because of a turbine lubricating oil leak. This unit should be repaired and back in service by the end of this week. PREPA's Aguirre station has suffered a variety of failures. Recently, Unit 1 tripped offline due to a blockage in the cooling water intake system, and Unit 2 was limited due to the same event, as well as issue with a regulator valve. In 2019, PREPA installed combustion turbines at Palo Seco that were briefly operated under a temporary emergency waiver granted by the Environmental Quality Board, following the January 2020 earthquakes. Unfortunately, PREPA could not run those turbines last month to make up for the loss of other units because it awaits a clearance from the Environmental Protection Agency, and we can stress enough the need for the EPA to act soon on this. Fortunately, during the late August and September, private operating facilities were generally available. As required by FEMA, the Puerto Rico Central Office for Recovery, Reconstruction, and Resiliency, 4.3, PREPA and LUMA have developed an updated 10-year plan for the repairs and renewal of Puerto Rico electric grid, as well as generation dams and irrigation facilities. The first version of this plan, submitted on December 7, 2020, updated versions will be submitted every 3 years. Over the past 5 months, PREPA has advanced a large number of projects through the early stages of FEMA and Core 3 review and through the required Puerto Rico Energy Bureau approval process. With these approvals in hand, PREPA and LUMA issued tax orders for architectural and engineering designs work that will fit into project approval submittals. Of the roughly 10.7 billion that has been obligated under FEMA programs, PREPA is responsible for generation, dams, hydroelectric, and irrigation projects involving investment around $2.5 billion. Around 900 million has been identified for generation projects and nearly 1.6 billion for dams, hydro, and irrigation.
Mr. Gill, you're a minute over. If you could wrap up, if you don't mind, sir.
Sure, I will, sir. Generally, and PREPA continue to work with LUMA to implement the agreement and to support efforts to transform the Puerto Rico transmission and distribution grid. We have the goal of making our system more reliable, resilient, cleaner, and affordable, and more customer-centric. PREPA has taken a proactive approach to address and resolve the problems that have led to an unacceptable number of outages due to its generation fleet. We are making progress in securing federal funding to support. Sir?
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I would hope that, as I said earlier, I hope the witnesses understand 5 minutes. We have a lot of witnesses and we have members that have questions. And so if anything within your power to limit that would be great. Let me now turn to the chairman of the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau, Mr. Edison Aviles Delis. Sir, you're recognized. Thank
Yes,
you.
good afternoon, Chairman Grijalva, Ranking Member Westerman, Congresswoman Gonzalez Colon, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Edison Aviles de Liz. I am the chair of the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau. On behalf of the PREP, I appreciate the opportunity afforded to present our views regarding the implementation of the LUMA transmission and distribution contract. The PREP was created in 2014 by Act 57, serving as a key component for the full and transparent implementation of the Act's energy reform goals. The PREP has a mandate to ensure the electric service is safe, reliable, and affordable. The T&D system in Puerto Rico is now operated and maintained by LUMA under the Operation and Maintenance Agreement entered by PREPA, the P3, and LUMA in accordance with Act 120. The T&D agreement is implemented with the oversight from the P3 authority, PREPA, and the PREP. Act 120 safeguards the powers of the Energy Bureau regarding energy matters, as well as its authority to regulate, supervise, and ensure compliance with the energy public policy of Puerto Rico, including, but not limited to, matters related to the T&D agreement. Since the last time the PREP testified before this committee, the PREP has undertaken an extensive review of the plan proposed by LUMA. The PREP's responsibility is to ensure these plans improve the delivery of electric service and increase the resilience of the electric infrastructure against future weather events. PREP is working to ensure the use of the federal reconstruction dollars assigned to Puerto Rico is aligned with the requirements and targets imposed by our energy public policy. During the front-end transition period of the T&D agreement, the PREP extensively evaluated LUMA's plan that included opportunity for public participation and wide dissemination through the PREP's YouTube channel. This evaluation resulted on approval that carry specific conditions that LUMA needs to satisfy at determined intervals during LUMA's contracted period. LUMA is a certified electric service company within the PREP's regulatory jurisdiction. During the interim service period, the electric utility maintenance and operation are shared by LUMA and PREPA, where LUMA is responsible for planning, operating, and maintaining the T&D system, and PREPA is in charge of the operation and maintenance of the generation system. PREP's strong oversight of LUMA and the electric industry in Puerto Rico is demonstrated by the extensive range of proceedings currently underway. The PREP is working over 25 proceedings that address the significant components of LUMA's responsibilities. The responsibilities assisting operating includes improving system reliability, achieving sustainability, and preserving the cost effectiveness of the electric services. The federal funding made available to Puerto Rico in response to the disasters arising from Hurricane Maria is a major enabler of the rebuild of the electric grid, in which a system that meets industry standard is modern and flexible and able to integrate renewable generation, will feature the resilience required to better withstand a future weather event. The PREP has already evaluated and approved around 250 electric system reconstruction projects that amount to $8.29 billion. Any permanent work proposed for the electric infrastructure needs approval from the PREP before it can move forward to the recipient of the federal funding. The PREP is the entity vested in Puerto Rico with ensuring that the investment made on the electric infrastructure are consistent with the energy public policy. In addition, to ensure that adequate controls are in place for the efficient use of public funds, the PREP is currently evaluating LUMA's procurement processes. I am pleased to represent before you here today the public interest of the people to the legal mandate bestowed upon the PREP to provide a strong leadership and oversight of the recovery and modernization of the Puerto Rico electric grid. I look forward to your question and remain committed to continue building up the working relationship with the committee for the benefit of Puerto Rico. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. And let me now turn to President and Chief Executive Officer, LUMA Energy, Puerto Rico, Mr. Wayne Stensby. Sir, you're recognized. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dear Chairman Grijalva, Ranking Member Westerman, Resident Commissioner Gonzalez Colon, and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to share LUMA Energy's perspective as we stand here barely 4 months into this historic public-private partnership for the operation of the transmission and distribution system of Puerto Rico. This partnership is indeed a critical step in the overall transformation of the electric system, but by no means is it the only step. When we first began this operations in June, we knew that how difficult and what an important task we faced. Change is hard and change will inevitably take time, but change is the reason that we are here today. The people of Puerto Rico have been demanding it for years. The responsibility that comes with providing electricity to customers is a serious one, and we do not take it lightly. As this committee knows well, the Puerto Rico electric system is arguably the worst in the United States and has been for a very long time, even prior to the devastating hurricanes of 2017. In order to move forward, we are focusing on creating change of the physical infrastructure, but also of business processes and the creation of our very own company culture. I would like to start by stating how proud I am of the team here at LUMA. Today, we are more than 3,000 employees strong, and many of those were hired from PREPA. They embraced the change that they knew was needed. Those that did join LUMA did so under extraordinary circumstances, in many cases defying their friends, facing threats from those claiming to share their interests, and even being the targets of terrible and unspeakable acts of vandalism and intimidation. They did, however, get to work on June the 1st, and immediately they faced significant adversity again. First, access to equipment, tools, fleet, and roads, as well as warehouses to restore electricity were so limited that it was only able to be remediated through a court-ordered restraining order. Within our first 2 weeks of operation, LUMA and its customers faced targeted denial of service attacks, disrupting information, and then, unfortunately, a fire at the Montecilla substation, disrupting service to approximately 800,000 customers. Thanks to the heroic efforts of the LUMA team, nearly all of those customers were restored within 24 hours, which is an unprecedented response here in Puerto Rico. Our team continues to grow, and today we've received more than 100,000 job applications from all across Puerto Rico, a strong endorsement of our mission. As part of our continued efforts to build a modern, world-class workforce, we've recently come to terms on a collective bargaining agreement with the International Brotherhood of Electric Workers, or IBW, who has recently amalgamated with one of the larger PREPA legacy unions. This represents the first newly negotiated agreement for labor at the electric utility in over a decade. As part of our commitment to Puerto Rico, LUMA's parent companies are actively investing in economic and workforce development. The new LUMA College for Technical Training in Canóvanas represents an investment of more than $10 million by our parent companies and bringing in world-class training and workforce development for technical trades, all through an accredited education program. Our first class of line workers will be graduating from this program later this month, and we look forward to seeing the impact that this will have in our utility in the coming years. While the transformation is in its early days, we have many reasons to be optimistic. We are seeing the impact of the changes as we implement them. For example, customers are seeing the impact of solar on their rooftops. We've increased the processing speed of this application process by nearly 7 times, and we've cleared half the backlog that we inherited in June. Some of those customers have been waiting for as long as 2 years. We will be through this entire backlog in queue by the end of this year. We recently published queuing information on our website to improve the transparency of this interconnection process. We're not just focusing our efforts on outages, but we're focusing on fixing the infrastructure so that we can prevent the outages in the first place. Our rate of pole replacement over our first 4 months is more than twice what PREPA had historically managed. And we've reconnected and replaced a large number of substations and lines, many of which had not been operational since Hurricane Maria. Still, there's a lot to be done. We are heavily focused on accelerating the major capital projects that we will be managing on behalf of PREPA. There are currently about 65 projects representing nearly $2.8 billion that have recently been approved, initial statements of work, and are going through various stages of engineering and environmental assessments today. Many of these projects require close collaboration with PREPA as the subgrantee, as well as Core 3, FEMA, and also experts from the Department of Energy and national labs to ensure that they're compliant and it's a prudent use of federal funds. With that, I'd like to thank the committee for its time and its dedication to this very important topic. As we continue to emphasize, LUMA is here to be a transparent, accountable partner that will deliver improved customer service, increased emergency preparedness, and a safer, more effective workforce, supporting the overall economic recovery and growth of Puerto Rico. We have just begun, and we remain committed to playing our role in transforming the electric system.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Yields, and appreciate your testimony. Let me now invite the Executive Director of the Puerto Rico Public-Private Partnership Authority, P3A, Mr. Fermín Fontanes. Sir, you're recognized.
Good afternoon, Chairman Grijalva, Ranking Member Westerman, Congresswoman González Colón, and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you. My name is Fermín Fontanes, and I am the Executive Director of the Puerto Rico Public-Private Partnerships Authority, an entity created pursuant to Act 29 and the government entity charged with transforming Puerto Rico's electric system by securing private sector partners to improve power generation, transmission, and distribution for Puerto Rico. The P3 Authority is leading the efforts towards the transformation and recently oversaw the process that resulted in the transfer of operations of the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority's transmission and distribution system to LUMA. Under the agreement, LUMA will operate, maintain, and modernize Puerto Rico's transmission and distribution system for a 15-year term. My testimony today will cover the following topics: the delineation of responsibilities within the government agencies, the P3 Authority's role as a party to the agreement, and the next steps in the transformation of Puerto Rico's electrical system. Responsibility under the agreement are as follows. The P3 Authority is charged with overseeing the operators and PREPA's compliance with the terms of the agreement. The Energy Bureau is responsible for regulating, overseeing, and ensuring the operators' compliance with applicable law and public policy. The Energy Bureau oversees all operational and technical aspects of LUMA's performance. PREPA remains the owner of the system and cooperates with the operator and the P3A so that it can perform its obligations under the agreement. As the government agency responsible for overseeing the implementation of all public-private partnerships, the P3 Authority is committed to the success of the project and fully focused on exercising its contractual oversight functions. During the transition period, the P3 Authority played a pivotal role in ensuring that the operator was able to begin operating the system within the agreed timeframe. The P3 Authority was responsible for assisting in reviewing and/or approving plans, manuals, and budgets submitted by the operator. Throughout the term of the agreement, the P3 Authority is charged with reviewing and approving annual budgets, as well as the incentive fee, and exercising oversight in relation to the operator's compliance with budgets, its obligations under the agreement. In order to ensure that the P3 Authority is able to properly execute its mandate, the operator is required to deliver monthly reports to the P3 Authority. As part of its oversight functions, the P3 Authority also reviews the operator's performance metrics filed on a quarterly basis with the Energy Bureau. LUMA's first metrics report includes data collected by the operator for the first 3 months since it commenced operations. In the 4 months since LUMA began performance under the agreement, outages continue to be a problem and in some cases appear to have worsened. However, during each outage, the P3 Authority has been in constant communication with LUMA and PREPA, leading to better alignment and delineation of corrective actions. The next step in the transformation is the procurement of one or more private operators to assume the operation and maintenance functions of Puerto Rico legacy electrical generation facilities. LUMA and the selected operators will be legally bound to comply with applicable law, including the mandates of Act 17 for the integration of renewable energy. Puerto Rico's electrical system transformation will not be accomplished in the span of 4 months. However, with the government's oversight, we are confident that the operator will be able to achieve our goals. Transforming Puerto Rico's electric system is a process that will take time and effort. It is true that the outages continue to affect the residents of Puerto Rico, but we must not continue to come up with temporary solutions to a permanent problem. The government of Puerto Rico remains confident that the agreement is key to Puerto Rico's transition to a modern, affordable, resilient, and reliable system that will serve as a driver of economic recovery and growth. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, sir. And let me now ask the Executive Director of the Central Office of Recovery, Reconstruction, and Resiliency, Mr. Manuel Lavoy, for your comments, sir.
Thank you. In the interest of time, if I may, I will skip several paragraphs of my written testimony. Dear Chairman Grijalva, Ranking Member Westerman, and Congresswoman Gonzalez, and members of Congress. In Puerto Rico, the devastation caused by Hurricanes Irma and Maria paved the way for historic obligation of federal funds for the Public Assistance Program of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, including approximately $10.5 billion destined for permanent reconstruction works related to the Puerto Rico Electrical Power Authority, PREPA. We expect a significant amount of funds from public assistance hazard mitigation measures and FEMA's hazard mitigation grants program, total allocation of $4 billion in federal funding for mitigation measures related to Hurricane Maria, of which about $1 billion are expected to be assigned for PREPA projects. As related to FEMA PA and hazard mitigation funding for Hurricane Maria, it is very important to point out that non-federal cost share requirements will be covered by CDBG-DR or CDBG-MIT. To manage this enormous sum of federal monies and ensure not only adequate project execution, but full transparency, accountability, and compliance with applicable laws and regulations, the government of Puerto Rico created a Central Office for Recovery, Reconstruction, and Resiliency, CORE3, which in turn acts as the recipient of FEMA PA and hazard mitigation monies. Furthermore, CORE3 Executive Director also serves as the governor's authorized representative. Accordingly, after the occurrence of a major disaster and subsequent presidential declaration, FEMA awards PA and/or hazard mitigation force to CORE3 as recipient, while CORE3 enters into subaward agreements with subrecipients and serves as pass-through entity to provide funding to carry out part of the PA or hazard mitigation activities. As recipient, CORE3 is also responsible for providing technical assistance and ensuring that subrecipient activities are carried out in full compliance with FEMA and other federal, state, local requirements. On the other hand, subrecipients are responsible for actual procurement and project execution pursuant to applicable federal, state, and local regulations, which in most cases mandate a full and open competition process. The fact that LUMA is an agent of PREPA for disaster recovery has required for everyone involved to familiarize with the basic terms of this transaction, the O&M contract. The qualified O&M agreement, where PREPA's transmission and distribution and other assets remain their own, is something that was consulted with FEMA and carefully carved as part of the P3 procurement and contracting process, inasmuch they had to remain as PREPA assets for purposes of receiving the above-mentioned disaster recovery funding. Thus, PREPA remains the applicant and subrecipient of federal funds before FEMA and CORE3. At this point, we are immersed on what is known as the post-award process, which requires individual project obligation before moving forward with actual construction work. To comply with FEMA policies for PA projects obligated under what is known as the FEMA Accelerated Award Strategy, or FAST, LUMA and PREPA file a joint 90-day work plan, which covers project execution for such period, and the work plan must be updated and filed every 90 days before FEMA and CORE3, and all relevant parties frequently meet to discuss and resolve pending issues. Although the FAST $10.5 billion obligation for PREPA occurred on September 24, 2020, the reality is that it only represents a fixed PREPA reconstruction work budget to set amount. Currently, only funds for architectural and engineering design services are authorized to be utilized for purposes of submitting scopes of work for FEMA review and approval. The aforementioned amount does not consider what could potentially be millions of dollars in additional funding for hazard mitigation measures as allowed by the PA program under the Stafford Act. We are currently working with FEMA, PREPA, LUMA to address pre-construction disbursements, hazard mitigation evaluation, and budget allocation for PREPA projects under the FAST obligation, and several other issues surrounding this post-award process, including those related to the evaluation and compliance with FEMA environmental and historic preservation requirements, which in turn concerns several federal regulatory agencies. At this stage, another key player, known as the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau, our independent state regulator for all energy-related matters, is deeply involved in the reconstruction process inasmuch prior approval of every single project in the pipeline must be approved by the regulator to ensure consistency with the applicable state laws and regulations. While most damages caused by Hurricane Maria were on the transmission and distribution system, including buildings, poles, substations, transmission lines, and other assets, which is in turn represented in the distribution of the $10.5 billion FEMA obligation for permanent work, there are also several projects to be funded under FEMA PA and hazard mitigation programs that will impact generation assets. Furthermore, yet to be completed obligations related to the 2020 earthquake disaster are sure to positively impact the generation side of PREPA's operations. Our mission at Core 3, as recipient and administrator of the FEMA PA and hazard mitigation funds, and our inherent responsibility over efficiency, compliance, and transparency of the federal funds flowing to the subrecipients, is to provide all the technical assistance required for LUMA and PREPA in furtherance of the obligation and execution of the recovery and reconstruction projects. Current projections show that procurement and a number of impactful projects should begin during 2022. Moving forward, we expect to continue improving disbursement processes and collaborating with all relevant parties and other federal agencies to build back a better, more resilient Puerto Rico energy infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you. And let me now recognize Ms. Ruth Santiago, Community and Environmental Attorney. The floor is yours. Time is yours. You're recognized, Ms. Santiago.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Grijalva and all. I am about to find my statement. Okay, so sorry about this. For some reason, I can't find it. Sorry about that.
Would you like us to go to another witness and come back to you?
Sure, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me now recognize Professor Agustin Irizarry, Professor Electrical Engineering, University of Puerto Rico. Professor, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Dear Chair Grijalva and members of the House Committee on Natural Resources, I appreciate the opportunity to testify and submit written comments on PREPA post-implementation of the LUMA transmission and distribution contract. I am Dr. Agustin Irizarry, and I have been studying and working with electric power systems in general, and the Puerto Rico power system in particular, for over 25 years. I believe LUMA Energy's operation of our electric system has been detrimental to the well-being of hundreds of thousands of residents of Puerto Rico. I will join Ruth Santiago's message to this committee to urge the federal government to earmark the FEMA funds allocated for the Puerto Rico electric system to be used for rooftop solar and battery systems and energy efficiency programs that will provide resilient electric service, sustainability, and economic benefits to the residents of Puerto Rico, as shown by many studies. Under LUMA, we have experienced longer and more frequent outages and widespread problems with severe voltage fluctuations. LUMA publishes on its website, under Service Interruption, a table indicating the number of clients without service, updated every 10 minutes. Note that the client is a meter, not a person. Thus, the number of people without electricity is 3 to 4 times the numbers of clients without electricity. After processing the data, we estimate that the average number of clients without service at any moment during September 2021 was 4,943. This estimate does not include load shed days or outliers. The almost 5,000 average clients without service is 2 to 3 times worse than it was during 2012-2014, when I was an elected member of PREPA's governing board. By then, the average number of clients without service on an ordinary day was between 1,500 and 2,000. And service is also much worse than it was compared to the period directly prior to LUMA's takeover of the system. According to reliability indices filed by LUMA with the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau, the time it takes to restore electric service after an interruption has increased significantly in all regions of the island under LUMA. The average system-wide time to restore electric service after an interruption increased from 2 hours and 18 minutes during March, April, and May 2021 with PREPA to 5 hours and 23 minutes during June, July, and August 2021 under LUMA. Why is this happening? I believe the problem fundamentally stems from a shortage of skilled and experienced workers. On June 1st, 2021, 3,119 PREPA workers were transferred to other government agencies. How many linemen has LUMA hired to replace the ones that left? How well trained are these workers? How much experience, if any, did they have with the Puerto Rico electric system prior to June 1st? We do not know the answer to these questions, even though the Puerto Rico legislature asked LUMA weeks ago. LUMA refused to answer and went to court to not answer. All courts in Puerto Rico, including the Puerto Rico Supreme Court, have ordered LUMA to answer. We are still waiting for a resolution of the second reconsideration LUMA filed before the Puerto Rico Supreme Court. In my opinion, a well-trained workforce is the most important part of any infrastructure. Poles, conductors, switches, generators are all bought with money. People must be hired and trained, and this is a process that takes more than money. It takes well-trained people to train the newly hired, and training takes time. Human capital cannot be replaced in a few months, and in the case of specialized positions, such as power system dispatchers and high-voltage linemen, it will take years of training for a person to become truly proficient. Is the lack of well-trained and enough people the cause of worse reliability and voltage surges? I believe it is. I am part of the Queremos Sol multi-sectoral coalition of Puerto Rican community, environmental, and labor organizations that put forward in 2018 a policy proposal for the renewable energy transformation of Puerto Rico's electrical system under a reformed public ownership model. The proposal emphasized efficiency and distributed renewable electric energy, particularly rooftop solar and behind-the-meter storage, as a strategy to provide resilience to households to reduce the impact on agricultural and ecological valuable lands from utility-scale renewable energy projects, and to reduce the island dependence on imported fossil fuels and extensive transmission systems. In early 2021, we completed a study where we used advanced modeling tools to make detailed simulations of the electrical grid and model, probably for the first time, most of the distribution system. We used data obtained from PREPA to perform an in-depth modeling of scenarios with increasing penetration of renewable energy, up to 75%, with over half of that from residential installations of total electricity consumption by 2035. Our study shows that a grid with distributed generation based on rooftop solar and storage for homes and businesses can operate safely and reliably, saving money and stabilizing prices. The distribution system can support high levels of penetration of such systems with minimal investments. In conclusion, for the reasons summarized in this testimony, we urge the committee to investigate PREPA's agreements with LUMA Energy, and in particular, the lack of trained personnel to properly operate the electric system. We request that the House Committee on Natural Resources include an inquiry on the status of FEMA funds for Puerto Rico electric system work to ensure that the funds are used in a cost-effective manner to provide affordable, distributed, renewable, and resilient electric energy for Puerto Rico. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentleman yields. Let me now return to Ms. Santiago.
Yes.
You're recognized for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Grijalva, and hello again. Good afternoon. On behalf of the Puerto Rico and stateside groups joining in this testimony, we appreciate the opportunity to testify on the PREPA post-implementation of the LUMA transmission and distribution contract. The groups joining in this testimony have substantial concerns with both the LUMA operation of the electric system and the control that LUMA wields over federal funds for electric system work in Puerto Rico. We ask this committee to investigate the LUMA contract and to urge the federal government to earmark the FEMA funds for on-site and rooftop solar and battery systems and similar alternatives that will provide life-saving electric service to the residents of Puerto Rico. Multiple studies have shown the viability, reliability, and economic benefits of rooftop solar and storage. The government of Puerto Rico has $9.6 billion allocated by FEMA at its disposal to solve the current energy crisis. By deploying rooftop solar and storage, the federal government must ensure that taxpayer funds are invested in accordance with federal laws and policies that promote cost effectiveness, tackling the climate crisis, and centering environmental justice. Solar energy deployment in Puerto Rico is expected to create nearly 20,000 jobs by 2030. Since LUMA took over operation of the system, Puerto Rico has suffered constant power outages, destructive voltage fluctuations, fires caused by electric malfunctions, where hundreds of thousands of residents and businesses have been deprived of electric service for extended periods of time. People are now referring to the constant outages as Hurricane LUMA. Lately, LUMA has alleged that the outages are attributable to lack of generation from PREPA plants. LUMA's numbers do not add up, and I invite you to look at the specific numbers in my written testimony. The documented evidence disproves LUMA's excuses. The Emergency Management KPI dashboard report shows that Puerto Rico has hundreds of megawatts of available capacity above maximum demand. Under the contract, LUMA is responsible for determining which plants inject or dispatch energy into the T&D system. The malfunction of part of the PREPA fleet still leaves enough generation available to supply demand. Another alternative that LUMA has to avoid outages is to work with large customers to use their own generation units, totaling about 234 megawatts. That's additional to what's in the PREPA system. Why has LUMA failed to dispatch the available PREPA units or use demand response alternatives? Does the fact that dispatching peaker units increases costs have something to do with LUMA's decision? Does the fact that the government of Puerto Rico has asked FEMA to fund new gas plants or plans to sell the plants to private investors have anything to do with not dispatching the existing units? PREPA's maintenance budget has been decreasing in the past few years. We asked the Commission to investigate the role of the FOMB, which controls PREPA's budget. LUMA is even delaying interconnection of rooftop solar from the few residents that can afford them, which could also contribute to alleviating energy demand and thus reduce the incidence of outages. The investment by PREPA of federal funds for rooftop solar and storage achieves three goals. One, to access energy resilience, equity, and justice, especially for lower income sectors. Two, establish a uniform procedure where the public corporation can, with local talent and organized communities, accelerate renewable energy deployment. And three, break the cycle of repeated destruction and reconstruction of the transmission system that often disrupts service and avoid the waste of taxpayer funds on transmission that will be devastated by future hurricanes. Because PREPA is in bankruptcy, FEMA funds are the only viable way to achieve renewable energy goals and accessible electric rates. Financing PPOAs with PREPA as a credit counterparty would entail prohibitively high interest rates and costs. The Stafford Act requires FEMA to determine the cost effectiveness of projects, reduce the risk of or increase the resilience to future damage, hardship, loss, or suffering. The electricity crisis manufactured by LUMA and the government of Puerto Rico not only inflicts economic costs, it can also cost lives. The LUMA contract grants LUMA control over federal funds and points to conflicts of interest and potential self-dealing by LUMA. Lastly, we urge the committee to investigate the LUMA contract and the role of FOMB in its imposition and in the electric crisis. We ask this committee to urge the federal government to earmark FEMA funds for on-site and rooftop solar and battery systems and similar alternatives that will provide life-saving electric service and include an inquiry on the proposed use of FEMA funds to ensure that they're invested in a cost-effective manner to provide affordable, renewable, reliable, and resilient electric energy. The use of the historic amount of funds allocated for the electric system will determine the viability of Puerto Rico for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony. And now turn to the members of the committee for their questions and comments. I will forego my initial questioning and turn to my colleague, the chair of the Insular Affairs and And Vice Chair Committee, Mr. Sablan, do you recognize for 5 minutes if you have any questions?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. I cannot seem to find Mr. Fernando Gil on my screen. Mr. Gil, are you with us, sir?
Yes, sir. As I mentioned, we had like technical difficulties in my testimony too. That's why we're basically navigating without like any type of
Can you hear
visibility.
me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can
All
hear
right,
you, sir.
thank
Can you hear me?
Thank you. Yes, I can. Thank you. And please, let's be mindful of my 5 minutes. Mr. Gil, what involvement have you had in, and what specific actions have you taken to ensure FEMA and CDBG monies are invested in full alignment with the President's climate goals and Puerto Rico's pro-renewables public policy? And who do you believe is responsible for the persistent delays in the flow of funds? And what congressional actions do you think could help? 3 questions in one.
Okay.
Thank you.
Congressman, thank you for the question. For what I grasp about it, actually, in terms of like the CBG funding, right now we have the Department of Housing, which I don't manage anymore or be in there anymore, has $1.9 billion authorized for it. They're working on the action plan that actually goes through a process that tends to have like community participation in order to draft the same. Regarding the FEMA funding, we have a regular oversight from also FEMA, but from the Core 3, there's a plan in place for it. And that plan complies with the IRP and all the applicable law. In order to speed up the process, we actually, within the means that we have, we can see which kinds of projects actually can be accelerated in a way, in a more speedy way, and also see which other projects that are not as visible or important in terms of IT technology and other things can run parallel to them instead of waiting for other quarters to be implemented.
Well, yeah, thank you. There has been, from what I've heard from testimonies, there has been persistent delays in the flows of funds. So who do you believe is responsible for these delays?
Oh, sir, actually the delay is crystal clear, and it was basically put out there by the Office of Inspector General of HUD, and where basically it's determined that the HUD administration may, more than probably than not, back in the last administration, withhold funds, and obviously from that time of having all the action plans approved till the signature of that grant agreement that basically give you the ability to execute all the programs, more than 300 days went by, and that's unacceptable, because then what happened was it takes you out from the planning process and then sort of like keeps you on a navigating on a sea, like on dark sea, in that sense that you cannot see what's going to happen because you're not aware or you're not secure that funding is secure there. So being that,
so
I know that
it's
this
hot.
administration, this administration
So
has
it's-
made like great.
So it's HUD. HUD has been responsible for the delay of the funds, in your opinion.
Well, in the delay of the fund, it was actually, there was 1.9 that it was appropriated back in the supplemental of 2018. That $1.9 billion related to the power energy, the notice came out recently after the Biden administration took over.
Yeah, thank you. Chairman, I have other questions I'll submit for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sablan. Let me now turn to the gentlelady from Puerto Rico, Ms. Gonzalez Colon. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know this is a good panel. We got many people here, and with the situation on the island that today you have power, maybe tomorrow you will not. I think there are several questions that need to be answered. The first, and I'll submit some questions for the record as well. But I think we are hearing here about, I see 3 major issues. The first one, how good is our infrastructure right now? It's going to handle any hurricane, can handle any other situation. The second one, how reliable that could be, knowing that there's a goal of 2050 to have 100% renewables, but then Puerto Rico right now just got 2% of renewables happening. And I know some of the witnesses established their goal or their aspiration to have federal money being earmarked for renewable communities in terms of establishing that kind of reliable service. But my concern here is this is not just using batteries or solar panels. We're talking about industry. We're talking about commercial, residential. Are we ready to move completely to renewables today without having the proper backups in terms of completing, satisfying the demand? I think we should be working to do both ends in terms of looking to the renewable integration that should be achieved, but at the same time, allowing stable energy on the island, certainty in terms of the energy that is provided for not just communities, but the industry itself. So my question will be to PREPA. It could be answered both to chairman of the board or to the current CEO of PREPA, Engineer Colon. And the first one will be in terms of the grid itself. Is it a condition to handle a lot of PREPA's generation? And second, how resistant is the infrastructure today to handle a hurricane? And I will love if you can go directly to the point and be mindful of the time.
Mr. Colon will answer that question since it's a technical one.
Thank you, Madam Congresswoman. My name is Josue Colon. I'm the new appointed CEO for PREPA. And my answer for your question is that the system, the generation system of Puerto Rico, as today, is not as reliable as it should be. As you should know, we were handling many outages and load shedding in the past 2 months. Right now, we are handling better the load that the system is carrying out, but in general, our system is still fragile, and we are trying with the resources that we have to improve what the fleet that we have day by day.
Question: how much integration of renewables can be really achieved by 2025? I know the law mandates it, so I would like to know if it's possible, and with the resource that you have and the current situation, that is real, that you can have to 2025 or even to 2050, the complete goal of renewables.
Okay, I'll handle that question based on the RFPs that we're running, Congresswoman Gonzalez, and basically there's a total of 37 or 3,750 megawatts that are being basically programmed for it, and we're running RFPs for it. Like already, the first RFPs out is for 1,000 mega with 500 of batteries power also, and there's like other trenches that are coming out for 500 megawatts and 250 megawatts for storage capacity within 6 months of difference. So basically before 2025, I'm sorry, we're trying to achieve that goal. Obviously, there's other factors to consider based on the grid, and actually the new batteries that we have, or the existing batteries right now, as the grid our grid was designed to provide energy, not to receive it in that sense. So it's not that it's not feasible or it's not possible, but the grid as it is right now, it's not as efficient as it will be when the grid is ready.
Answer me this question, yes or no. The dozen or so LNG power units proposed in the PREPA and FEMA action plan, will these in any way prevent the continuing of the conversion to renewables?
Well, yeah, I'm going to answer that question. In my personal opinion, the answer is yes. Any modernization that can be accomplished to the actual fleet with new technology that use natural gas are going to help PREPA, help the system to handle better the introduction of new renewable energy sources. That is a matter of technical issues, and by sure those kind of technologies are going to be more helpful for the system to handle new injection of renewable to the generation of PREPA.
Thank you. My time is up, so I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlelady yields. Let me now turn to the gentlelady from New Mexico, Representative Stansberry. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to everyone for convening today's important hearing. I recently had the opportunity to visit Puerto Rico and Vieques and saw firsthand myself the beauty of the island and, of course, the continued impacts that the hurricanes have had on basic infrastructure, including the electric grid. In fact, numerous people while I was visiting shared that they had lived for months without electricity on Vieques in the wake of Hurricane Maria. And as we've heard this morning, many have continued to experience blackouts across the island as part of their daily lives. Access to electricity is not only a necessity, but a basic human right. Without it, medical facilities cannot operate, children cannot study, businesses cannot remain open, and daily life is disrupted in countless ways. Since LUMA took over energy transmission and distribution, residents are reporting that they are paying twice as much as mainland customers for electricity and that power is going out 3 to 4 times a day. These blackouts affect, as we've heard this morning, hundreds of thousands of people and demonstrate the clear need to modernize Puerto Rico's electric grid and address these operational issues. This challenge is particularly acute in Puerto Rico in large part because it is an island, but is also a challenge that communities across the US are facing. In fact, just last year, we saw in Texas as a downed electric grid affected millions who had no heat and water for days in the wake of a major storm. The need to modernize our grid across the US has reached a major inflection point in terms of ensuring the safety and well-being of our communities and meeting the moment of our clean energy revolution and addressing climate change. That's why in New Mexico, I worked with colleagues on both sides of the aisle to help pass a bipartisan grid modernization bill just this last year, because modernizing our grid is both a humanitarian issue and a necessity for tackling climate change. The people of Puerto Rico, as has been discussed, recognize the importance of this transition and the need for renewables. But unfortunately, in February of this year, 16 commercial solar projects that would have generated 593 megawatts of electricity were rejected, leaving the island dependent on a coal-fired power plant and non-renewable resources. The transition to renewables and modernization of the grid are crucial to the residents of the island and also to climate action across the country and the planet. As the devastation of Hurricane Maria has demonstrated, and as the world watched, we know that the federal government did not respond and act in good faith, and we're still seeing those impacts today. And I believe it is the federal government's responsibility to ensure that our communities are safe and their basic needs are met. And so I believe it is our responsibility to not only, as Congress, conduct oversight, but to also support the needs of Puerto Rico and the communities in addressing these issues. The people of New Mexico and my district stand united with the people of Puerto Rico in demanding energy justice and grid modernization and the social, economic, and environmental imperative of doing so. And with that, I would like to just take a moment to ask a question of Mr. Gill. Mr. Gill, thank you so much for being here today. It appears, and as was just asked, the Fiscal Oversight and Management Board recently voted to reject this 450 megawatts of solar projects and has recently stated that it may reject up to 1,000 megawatts of renewable projects that are currently being teed up. Combined with the other challenges that we've heard this morning in terms of providing electricity, it's clear that the system is in dire need of modernization. We've heard from a few of the witnesses this morning, but can you please share with us, one, what you believe can be done, what is needed to bring these renewables online and transition the grid to a more stable and resilient power system, and how the federal government, especially as we are working right now to pass an infrastructure and reconciliation bill, can help and support Puerto Rico as and the utility as it is embarking on building a more resilient grid.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for that question. And from the complexity of it, obviously, I mean, there's had been like process that they started back in 2012, and around almost like the same amount that we're putting out there for renewable energy, more than 3,000 megawatts, was supposed to be already built. You know, things happened that they took away those. Actually, in these like recently, we submit to the FOMB around 150 megawatts only that they were requested that they comply with our MTRs, and also they also were the amount that the grid as itself can resist right now. So answering to your question, it's something that it's not that we're saying that it cannot be done, but right now it's not feasible and it can bring some problems to the grid as is. Nonetheless, some combination of repairs of new of the turbines that they're completely broken or they can be shaped with different sorts of power or gas. For example, changing bunker fuel for LNG will give a more sustainable and can help us obviously move into the future with a more stable generating fleet, and at the same time looking forward to comply with all the Act 17 mandates regarding renewables.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields. Thank you very much. Let me now recognize Representative Whitmer for his 5 minutes. Questions, comments, sir, you're recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to yield my time to Representative Gonzalez Colon. And thanks again, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Colon?
Thank you, Representative Whitman, for yielding. I really appreciate that. My question will be to LUMA CEO now. And the question, and I want to say thank you to most of the panelists that are witnesses that are here today. We did a roundtable 2 weeks ago with stakeholders, just to know where is the status of all the federal funds that are being allocated to the island. We're talking about $9.6 billion that were approved by Congress in 2018 and 2019 for the reconstruction of the power grid on the island and some generation maintenance. At this time, none of those funds are being used. Again, $9.6 billion, their federal mandate. And one of the reasons for that is that FEMA just made those funds available last year. So that means that FEMA, LUMA needs to provide the scope of work to FEMA just to get an approval for that plan, and then begin those projects and receive part of the funds in a reimbursement process. I know FEMA recently changed the way to manage big projects like this to try to make them faster. And I know Core 3, the agency on the island, and PREPA are working to that end. But again, I think the short explanation I just did is one of the main concerns. Why, if we do have $9.6 billion in federal funds to get a renewable system, to change the power grid, make it more resilient, and help with the generation as well, those funds are not being used. So my question to LUMA right now will be, how long it will take LUMA to provide to Core 3 or PREPA the scope of work for the change in the breakers, transformers, and many others in the transmission and distribution area?
Thank you very much, Commissioner, and appreciate the opportunity again. And I do want to say that grid modernization is exactly a fundamental element of what LUMA is here to do. Today, we are building this pipeline of projects, and today there are 65 projects that represent approximately $2.8 billion that are presently, they have received FEMA initial statements of work, and that allows us to proceed with preliminary engineering, with hazard mitigation efforts, and with development of EHP, or environmental and historic preservation requirements. Those 65 projects consist of approximately 23 transmission projects, 23 distribution projects, and 15 substations. The next step is to carry out that preliminary engineering. There are 6 architecture engineering firms engaged, and we then bring back a revised or more fully developed statement of work for FEMA approval. Once we receive FEMA approval, we then move into detailed engineering and procurement and eventual construction. We're optimistic that the leading projects, so those projects that are most advanced, are able to be out in the marketplace for construction contracts into 2022, and we're optimistic that we'll be able to put a shovel in the ground in the second quarter of 2022. I think it's vitally important that we start priming the pump, if you like. There are many other projects behind that have received PREB approval. And as I say, this is a large pipeline of work, but I think it's critical that those first projects start. As my fellow witness from Core 3 described in his testimony, there are many complexities with regard to matching and many other.
I know the complexities. What's going to be the timeline for submitting the scope of work documentation to FEMA to see the transmission and distribution funds?
For those very early projects, we would hope to get those statement of works back into FEMA by the end of the year or early next.
Okay, so, and you agree with me that some of the transformers and breakers can be taking 1 or 2 years of manufacturing, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Large power transformers, breakers, certainly in today's supply chain environment, often have between 6 and 18-month lead times. We are presently doing work to work with manufacturers and to develop a supply chain way, if you like, to pre-order some breakers and some transformers in order that we can better take advantage of actually getting substations into operation.
My time, I want to be mindful of the time, but I just make this question to let the people know that it's not just when the documentation is going to be submitted to FEMA, is how long it will take to have 1 or 2 years of just manufacturing to get the transformers. And with that, I yield back.
Okay, gentlelady yields. Let me now turn to the gentlelady from New York. Representative Velasquez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gill, can you please expand on the outages in Monacellos and Costa Sur? Were they caused by transmission issues?
Gonzalez, I would like to yield that question to the expert in this matter and the technical expert, engineer Josué Colón.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, Madam Congresswoman. The recently events that happened in the generation fleet that caused us the load shedding that happened in the last 2 months were related to some technical and mechanical problems that happened on South Coast, Unit 5 and 6. On unit
were they
6,
related to, were they caused by transmission issues? That's my question.
Okay, now I understand. On unit number 6, the failure that happened on the LP pressure of the turbine, we have information that lead to that the cause initiate with a failure on a transmission line. But specifically, if we can achieve or assign that failure to the transmission line alone, no, we don't have that kind of information at this point.
Mr. Gill, you made reference to Costa Sur, where in your statement you alluded about generation issues, didn't you?
Yeah, yes, I did, Congresswoman, and actually it was
Okay.
on August 22nd, and the transmission line fault led to a voltage fluctuation that affected generating facilities in the south, including Costa Sur. Those fluctuations actually caused Costa Sur Unit 6 go offline and damage the steam turbine rotor, as Engineer Josue Colon said.
Yes, thank you. My time is limited. Mr. Stenby, if generation is the issue, then why is taking longer to repair interruption since LUMA took over?
I think we need to understand, Congresswoman, that both the transmission, distribution, and the generation system is in a very challenging and precarious state. So I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's both for sure. Some people are seeing shorter outages. Some people are indeed seeing longer outages since LUMA took over. And I did talk about some of the early.
In fact, during the months of June, July, August of 2021, the average time for repairs was 323 hours compared to PREPA's 155 hours last year when PREPA was managing transmission and distribution.
Yes,
and
those are underreported statistics that we showed in front of the PREB from last year. And I did talk about some of the challenges we had in actually getting our equipment and our teams to work in June because of frankly of union blockades. But yes, we are indeed.
Sir, how many linemen does LUMA currently have who are employees and not hired contractors?
We have approximately 900 employees in the field that you would call the equivalent of what PREPA used to refer to as line workers.
And given the current energy crisis in Puerto Rico today, are you planning to hire more?
We will continue to train and we will continue to hire more. Indeed, especially for the large amount of FEMA and rebuilding work that will be required.
Okay. Out of the 900 workers that you have today, how many of those had no experience working on Puerto Rico's electrical system prior to June 1st?
I would say a very large portion of those have Puerto Rican experience, but I don't have the exact number.
Can you please provide the exact numbers to the committee?
Yes.
Sir, how many LUMA employees and executives earn more over $200,000 and how many earn over $500,000?
I'm not able to provide or not going to provide salary information regarding our employees now.
You are not. So, sir, do you believe in transparency?
I completely do, which is why we were posting customer outages when PREPA did
So
not.
why do you refuse to this day to comply with the request from the Puerto Rican legislature, whose responsibility is to enact public policy based on what is working and what is not? And if they don't have that information, how do you think the Puerto Rican government could exercise oversight?
There's substantial oversight under our contract. It follows Act 120, both from the PREB, from the P3 authority, and from PREPA, and LUMA is in complete compliance with that oversight and all of those laws.
Thank you.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
And lady yields. Let me now invite Ms. Representative Gomer. You have 5 minutes. Sir, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate the witnesses being here today. Since the Texas grid was mentioned earlier, let me point out Texas had been spending a great deal of its resources in moving toward what would be called or what is called green energy, with more solar, more windmills, and if that's what any area relies on, there are going to be times when you don't have energy. And that means you've got to have twice as many transmission lines going from something that you know you can count on to the same users. But aside from the additional cost, the Texas grid went down earlier this year but there had been a study previously, an analysis that indicated that Texas needed to winterize its natural gas facilities so that that would always be there. Well, Texas was so busy trying to be green that they didn't winterize what was needed in time of emergency. And so those were areas that froze up because of the winter storm. That's probably not going to be a major problem for Puerto Rico having facilities freeze up, but it does point to the fact, again, if you're relying totally on green energy, you better have standby ready to go. And Texas, unfortunately, didn't due to this pushing of more green energy without taking care of what you could rely on in a disaster. And by the way, the $2.2 billion in grants and federal loans to the green energy concave mirrors that magnified sunlight at 3 different towers. They burned up one of the towers. So in a quick, cheap way to deal with it, they quickly built a natural gas facility. So I would just encourage that for Puerto Rico's consideration. It's cheap. It helps clean up the air and can be amazingly helpful. Mr. LeBoy, I wanted to ask you, and if it's been answered, I missed it and I apologize, but how much damage remains unrepaired, unfixed, unreplaced from prior hurricanes and storms with regard to the grid or the generation of electricity?
Yes. So first of all, again, as I stated in my testimony, our role as recipients and administrators is to provide the technical support to the recipient, in this case,
Okay,
PREPA.
so you don't know. Let me ask, is there anybody that knows how much has that was damaged in prior storms in the way of generating facilities or capacity or grid that is not repaired? Anybody know? Well, if nobody knows, how do these experts? Yes, please.
I'm sorry.
I can offer, and perhaps Fernando Hill can chime in, but a very large, the vast majority of the FEMA funding that's been assigned for the T&D system here is a result of the storms and then the Build Back Better exercise. So I can tell you today that very little of it has been fully restored to a new and fully functioning system. That's in fact the exercise that's in front of us.
Well, okay, that's what I wanted to know, and that sounds like,
Congressman?
Yes. Go ahead.
After my name is Agustin Irizarry.
Right.
After about a year, around a year after Hurricane Maria, 99% of the people in Puerto Rico had electricity. It took a year or so, but the system was restored.
Yep, but apparently there's still a lot of equipment and things that need to be replaced or repaired. But I mean, we have that situation here. You run out of electricity, you can get it up and going, but for the long term, it's not helpful. But thank you, Professor. It just sounds like we got a lot of work remaining to do in Puerto Rico, and I appreciate your being here. I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gomer. Let me now invite the gentleman from Florida, Congressman Soto. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Puerto Rico faces major challenges. The people need reliable power. The blackouts need to stop. And we also need to work together to boost renewable and clean energy. I want to talk first about reliable power. As a brief history, Puerto Rico had a nearly totally government-run utility system, PREPA. This is an outlier. No state has a fully run government system. All states have public and private systems to encourage competition and avoid political patronage and corruption. As a result, their focus for years was on keeping rates low without making long-term investments to maintain and upgrade the grid. Add in an economic crisis, the debt, Hurricane Maria, and earthquakes. That is all decimated together a poorly maintained system, and now the people suffer as a result. The Puerto Rican government finally made a decision to increase competition by contracting with LUMA to handle transmission this summer. LUMA's job is to maintain and fix the very power lines that have been neglected for decades. We applaud LUMA for working with IBEW. IBEW trains some of the best electrical workers on the planet. Sadly, the transition hasn't been smooth. Many PREPA employees, I've heard over a third, and we'll get to that in a moment, didn't transfer to work over to LUMA. I understand the disappointment of some local unions in Puerto Rico who opposed the transition even after the transfer happened. But sadly, this discouragement slowed down the process of preparing and maintaining the grid. It slowed down the hiring of new people and training of new people and existing folks from PREPA and contributed to the blackouts. We need to conduct meaningful oversight of LUMA and stop the blackouts. But this committee also can't be blind to the facts that they inherited, LUMA and IBEW inherited a disaster of a grid just a few months ago this summer. The second point I want to make is on renewable energy. We applaud the Puerto Rico legislature for 100% renewable by 2050. This goal is incredible to boost renewables, especially rooftop solar, wind, hydro, and other clean electricity. The reality, though, is a stark difference. There are 6 diesel plants, 4 fuel oil plants, 1 coal plant, and 1 gas plant currently operating. First of all, diesel and fuel oil, it's the most expensive, it's the highest pollution, and it's the Stone Ages. No one in the States has this anymore. The diesel, fuel oil, and coal plants have to go. And that's my message to PREPA and to the fiscal board. Natural gas is a good bridge fuel, and the future is in wind and solar. PREPA must take seriously the Puerto Rico legislature's new renewable goals. This committee supports those goals. We urge PREPA and the fiscal board, and most importantly, the Puerto Rico government, to work with community solar organizations for rooftop solar, make conscious efforts to increase wind, including in the South, and overall to increase resiliency to combat climate change and energy independence. The bottom line, we need to conduct meaningful oversight. And the good news is we have Hurricane Maria recovery funds and soon Build Back Better funds to help with this transition. $1.9 billion for grid funds that have already gone out to notice. $12.1 billion in HUD funds that have been released recently by the Biden administration. Mr. Stensby, my question to you, how many employees what was the percentage of employees that didn't transfer over from PREPA to LUMA, and how has that affected blackouts?
Thank you very much, Congressman. And, you know, two points that I would like the opportunity to make is through our recruitment process, we put training and safety of all of our people first. And so we were very thorough.
I apologize, but my time is limited. I just need to know how many folks transferred over.
So of the approximate, slightly over 3,000 employees we have today, almost 1,300, or roughly 1,300 came from PREPA.
Okay, so a large share did not make the transition. Mr. Gill, what do you think it's going to take to transition away from diesel, coal, and fuel oil, the dirtiest of fuels, the most expensive of fuels for Puerto Rico?
Congressman Daniel Soto, thank you for everything that you do for Puerto Rico, but basically the goodwill and the ability and the possibility of the people making that we need to change that. That is not one thing or the other, that we have to be in balance here, that we have to try, like, obviously LNG, there's a combination that you can use like hydrogen in it and create green hydrogen. It's more efficient. It reduces 70% the CO2 emissions from it. So it's a combination, and then transition when that technology is even more advanced. Solar technology and renewable technology advanced in a second as computer did back in the day. So we need to obviously make that balance and be careful about the environment, but we have to also take into consideration Puerto Rico is a small island. There's the PV panel systems They cannot be disposed in landfills. They should be recycled. In the United States, there are not enough recycling facilities for PV panels. So those are the things that, in terms of like taking care of the environment, we have to consider for a new energy, and specifically for the betterment of our people.
Colleagues, let's stop the blackouts and let's make sure we ensure more clean energy and renewable energy. Let's focus on the achievable, and we can do it together. Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Thank you. Let me now ask Representative Graves. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for joining us today. Certainly a topic that we've spent a lot of time on in this committee. And again, thanks for being with us. I guess first question, maybe for Mr. Fontaines, and I'm not certain if you have expertise here or not, but I heard questions earlier about effectively the cost effectiveness of this agreement with LUMA. Was that a sole source process? Was it an open competition? How did that occur?
Thank you, Congressman. This was actually, it was a long process that took close to 2 years. We had 5 participants in the procurement process originally. At the end, we received 2 different proposals, and LUMA was the entity selected. So it wasn't a sole source. It was a competitive process through the P3 Act and our structure and our process. And we ended up with 2 solid proponents out of the 5 that are originally qualified presenting proposals.
Thank you. And is it your opinion that LUMA at this point is complying with the contract requirements that they're obligated to comply with?
Yes, from a contract perspective, they are complying with the requirements of the contract. Yes.
Okay, thank you. It was noted earlier that there was some lack of transparency or there wasn't value to taxpayers, and I guess I was struggling with understanding that, but I thank you for clarifying. Mr. Stensbury, this really is an amazing situation. Every time I represent South Louisiana, which we certainly have been subject to hurricanes, but every time I look back at this, I look at the amount of money that is being spent in building the system back. Have you ever seen a utility? Certainly y'all have experience operating around the United States and in Canada, I believe. Have you ever seen a situation where you have a utility operating like this, perhaps with the percentage of debt that is out there, the number of, I guess, the amount of theft of electricity that's out there? Have y'all ever operated in an environment like this?
No, I would say, frankly, PREPA, and not to cast any dispersions on my current colleagues at PREPA, but PREPA is unquestionably, call it the worst performing utility in the United States, and by each and every measure. But I think that what that speaks to, Congressman, is the need to, in fact, make meaningful change. And it also probably speaks to some of the resistance that we've been seeing, whether it's on customer service, whether it's on outage response, whether it's on labor relations, whether it's, that reinvestment. So certainly there's lots of experience with the reinvestment of this large capital program, and that's a very important part of this. And there's lots of experience with reconfiguring and bringing in better business processes. But I would say in terms of the basic, it took 2 decades for PREPA to get in this state, we shouldn't forget. And that's why it's so important to get started and continue to push ahead.
And I want to associate myself with Congressman Soto's comments about Puerto Ricans deserve electricity. They deserve better service. And we're investing extraordinary amounts of taxpayer dollars to get there. Could you talk a little bit about the role maybe that the project labor agreement has in either benefiting or perhaps challenging your ability to do your job?
For certain. So as I mentioned, we have a collective bargaining agreement now with our own workers. We've also rolled out a project labor agreement, which will be critical to supporting stability and predictability as this large amount of FEMA funding is used to rebuild the grid. I mean, it's very important that we get qualified, skilled, we put safety first, And really, we do put workers at the front of this equation, and Puerto Rican workers, and that was why between LUMA and the IBW, we have rolled out the PLA to bring that certainty so that we can deliver for customers.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to ask you a question for the record on that one. But last question, I'm seeing some of these targets for renewables in the future. One, as I understand, the current effort to try and add 4 cents to the bill is being rejected right now because folks are saying they can't afford it. What is your that they're able to achieve these renewable direction obligations or goals and the cost associated with that?
Well, I think what LUMA's really focused on is, to get a larger amount of renewable integration here, you do require a reliable transmission and distribution system. And so our focus is, at the end of the day, if you like, we're the transportation company, right? And we all know, and we believe at LUMA, that the better the T&D system is, the more renewables can be integrated into the system and in the end still provide reliable and affordable electricity. So that's where our focus is, Congressman.
Thank you, Mr. Stenberry. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you. I just want to make note that I think as we move forward, we need to be looking carefully at the price sensitivity of the investments that are being made to ensure that we're not going to be pricing Puerto Ricans out of power with the price sensitivity they apparently have. Yield back.
Gentleman yields. Thank you. Let me now recognize Representative Torres. Mr. Torres, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a quick yes or no question for the CEO of LUMA. Does your company operate the total energy distribution and transmission system on the island?
We are responsible for the transmission and distribution system. PREPA today remains responsible for the operation of the generation system.
But everywhere in the island, right? Not just
yes, all across the island, and also
because I've heard the word competition, but if one company is managing all the energy distribution and transmission infrastructure, that's not competition. That's objectively a monopoly. So LUMA's management of Puerto Rico's electric grid is cause for concern for me. Power outages and service disruptions remain prevalent. Customer complaints are said to have risen. Response times are said to have fallen. I've heard multiple mayors fault LUMA for the lack of communication. The mayor of Juana Diaz, for example, said it would have taken PREPA 4 to 5 hours to arrive at his town. By contrast, it takes LUMA 2 to 3 days. So by every indication, LUMA is failing the people of Puerto Rico. And my first question is directed to PREPA. If LUMA continues to underperform, does the operation and maintenance agreement allow the government of Puerto Rico to reverse the privatization of the electric grid?
Congressman Torres, we would like to, the expertise on that and the monitor of that contract is the P3 authority. So that question should be addressed to the P3 authority.
Are you a party to the agreement?
We are a party of the agreement
but as a party to the agreement, you should know whether if the new operator underperforms, whether you have the right to retrieve control of the electric grid. As a party to the agreement, that's a relevant fact to know.
Well, obviously, if it's declaring default by any chance, but then we'll have to take care of it.
Are you suggesting to me that the people of Puerto Rico are stuck with LUMA regardless of performance for the next 15 years?
Oh, sir, I'm saying obviously we have to respect contracts. If we don't do that, there's a constitutional impairment to the contracts.
I'm asking, are there performance standards built into the contracts?
The performance standards built into the contract are evaluated. If they're not performing that well, they don't receive the payment that they should receive for it in that sense. If we stuck to it, it's a matter of, we have the force here also, but in the meantime, we have to respect the contracts, and that's our position in that sense. Transitioning one day to another is almost impossible. We took a year with LUMA actually on a front-end transition. Let me move on. Going into the.
Let me move on. I just want to reclaim my time. As everyone knows, Puerto Rico is fundamentally dependent on imported fossil fuels. In order to facilitate the transition to clean energy, Puerto Rico passed a law, the Puerto Rico Energy Policy Act, which requires 40% clean energy by 2025, 60 by 40, 100 by 50. Several obstacles, however, have emerged on Puerto Rico's path to clean energy. And the greatest among those obstacles is the Financial Management and Oversight Board, which rejected 16 solar projects that would have brought renewable energy from 2 to 20% of Puerto Rico's electricity. So I feel like we are reminded once again that the United States is colonizing Puerto Rico in more ways than one. Not only is the United States subjecting Puerto Rico to higher fossil fuel costs via the Jones Act, but the United States, through the Financial Management and Oversight Board, is also actively preventing Puerto Rico from escaping those higher costs and transitioning to clean energy. Climate change is a financial risk, and by sabotaging the transition to clean energy, the Financial Control Board is planting the seeds of financial instability on the island. Now, I have a question for PREPA. According to the COO of Applied Energy Services, he said the following, quote, "We have the intention of transforming our energy production from coal to renewables before the 2027 deadline. If we reach an agreement today, we could do it in 2 years." So my question for PREPA, when are you going to reach an agreement with AES? Can you get an agreement done immediately so that the coal power plant can be closed within the next 2 years?
Congressman Torres, I'll take that question. And obviously, right now, we're running RFP processes as requested by the FOMB. Later on, the FOMB changed the story and says that we don't have to run the FOMB, like the procurement process. Yes,
I'm with you on that piece, but if can you reach an agreement with AES today that could, or in the near future?
It will be totally responsible on my behalf to take that position. Actually, right now, without the consent of the whole board and everything, and
before my time is up, what is the due date for the latest RFP regarding renewable energy? What's the new due? I know it was originally May, but it was delayed. What's the new due date?
There's already a first tranche. Second tranche is coming up next week in October, like the notice, and afterwards, every 6 months, we'll have like another RFP for it.
Okay, thank you.
Gentlemen, yield. Thank you very much. And let me now ask Ms. Vadawagan for that she's recognized for 5 minutes. Gentlelady, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this important hearing. At this time, I would like to just yield all of my time to Representative Gonzalez Colon.
Thank you.
I yield.
Thank you, Mara, and thank you, Chairman. And coming from an island, I know she understands how difficult it is for islanders like us in Puerto Rico, just to rely on the generation of electricity, not knowing if we're going to have power tomorrow or not. So the next question will be for me in terms of PREPA and LUMA both. Is our system near to a complete collapse near soon? I mean, not just in terms of generation, but in transmission. I just need a yes or no answer. Engineer Colon.
Thank you for the question, Madam Congresswoman. The answer is no, but I want to expand my answer. Our system is a critical condition right now in the generation side. As you know, we have many of our generating units not available because of lack of maintenance, and we are in an effort to bringing them back. And in the transmission system, also, as you may know, and the other congressman, the system was repaired after the hurricane, but not restored. So, for answer properly, your question is that both sides of the equation are under critical condition, but not to collapse at this point.
Okay.
Is the transmission distribution system near to a collapse? Lula?
Sorry, mute. I would answer in a very similar way. No, but it is critical that the reinvestment continue. And as we think about generation outages, it's only through those generation load shedding that we have been able to avoid the collapse. And so that's why it's so critical that we continue on with repairs on generation, and repairs and restoration on transmission.
Okay, then I will submit some questions for the record as well. The first one will be for PREPA and for LUMA. The FEMA funds that are allocated to the island are 2.4 billion for transmission and distribution and 4.9 billion, and 4.9 billion for distribution. I would like to know, how is the process expected to be managed? What's the timeline for PREPA and to LUMA to submit for FEMA for those scope of work, and for 3, the status of all of it? Who's going to be answering for maximizing the use of those funds to build a system that people can trust? I know that there's a lot of comments about the works in the shovel-ready projects that were requested for renewables in PREPA that were not approved by the board. My question to Mr. Fermin and to Mr. Hill, again for the record, it's if PREPA or the P3s challenge that FOMB decision of canceling those renewable contracts, and why? If there's any way to get those in the line when they will show already, and what was the main reason for that? I think that's not the scope of the board. That's something that should be in the hands of PREPA in the case of generation. My next question will be, how long it will take for all those units that are going to be receiving maintenance in the next months. Even private generators and the government generators are going to be receiving maintenance. So are we going to see more of these relay outages across the island? Do you have a plan that has been informed to the public in that sense? And remember, the many communities that rely on energy to pump their water. So if you don't have power in some rural communities, they will not have water at the same time. So that's the reason how this is so difficult to manage to the rest of the island. Mr. Hill?
Gonzalez, and thank you, Congresswoman, for it.
The gentleman would answer as quickly as possible because time's over already.
I will. Actually, from our end, we have like 40 projects totaling 2.5. They're already $78 million invoices and costs, and we still have pending 7.3 for the outstanding reimbursement for it. In terms of like the FOMB, no, they shouldn't, but they did based on the amount of money actually that it will cost, or the amount of money that it was projected based on the plan on the fiscal plan for it and the RP. And hence, if those projects were made back in the day, today we wouldn't have like that problem. Nonetheless, politics, and because it was done by the last administration, they took it out, and then the FOMB recently, after more than 8 years, actually requested the governing board to see their projects. We went out there, we negotiated with more than 16 of those, and then afterwards they make the decision that only 2 of them were gonna be. If we have the hands tied to it, yes, we do. But that's the way that our economy is working right now.
Thank you, sir. Look, situation. I understand that there's a lot of specificity to answers, but being long-winded is another issue. Let me now recognize Mr. Tanco. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for bringing such great focus to a very important concern for the people of Puerto Rico. As Puerto Rican communities recover and rebuild from the COVID-19 pandemic, as many work or attend school virtually, and as temperatures rise and storms worsen, Puerto Ricans need reliable and affordable electricity more than ever. And yet the island's electric grid, with less than 3% renewable electricity, continues to plague Puerto Ricans with often life-threatening outages while costing them double the average U.S. rate. So, Mr. Gill, what plans do you have in place to meet the renewable energy goals established by Act 17?
No, as it is right now, Congressman, we're running the RFPs requested in the seek for transparency to pick the best option for the island, and at the same time, when all the basically the grid modernization comes into place, then the idea of the virtual power plants can become to a fruition, and we may have an excess of those.
And Professor Irizarry, as extreme weather events become more frequent, what risks will the current plan pose, and how would solar energy bring more reliability and cost savings to Puerto Ricans?
Thank you, Congressman. We already saw what happens when we face a Category 4 or Category 5 hurricane. The transmission system collapses, and that will happen again, even if you rebuild it. If you rebuild it up to code, to current codes, it will still not withstand a Category 5 hurricane. What we are proposing is renewable energy on the rooftop of homes and commerce with storage. That proved to be the most resilient alternative to a hurricane like Maria. People that had solar rooftop systems with batteries continued with electricity provided with from their solar PV systems. I don't see how investing on a technology of the 20th century will bring us to a 21st century condition. We need to embrace new technology, and we have the know-how and the technology, and it's today cheaper than the alternative. So we encourage the government to review their plans to invest in old technology that is vulnerable to stronger storms as the ones we are seeing right now.
Oh, thank you very much. And Ms. Santiago, what obstacles currently impede a greater investment in energy sources like solar on the island?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. Primarily, the LUMA contract right now is the largest obstacle we're seeing for integration of renewables. In fact, at a hearing before the Energy Board, one of LUMA's representatives, a guy named Lee Wood, said that FEMA funds could not be used for rooftop solar. He was corrected immediately by the board personnel, but that has been LUMA's position. They want to, as Professor Irizarry just mentioned, rebuild the old transmission, 20th century transmission system that will be knocked down by the next hurricane. And that's taxpayer money to the tune of $9.6 billion or more will just be wasted. So what we're proposing as a society, and what's really popular in Puerto Rico, and anyone with any kind of means is doing, is acquiring rooftop solar. So PREPA, with that allocation from FEMA, can do that for low, middle income and businesses and residents all over Puerto Rico and provide life-saving resiliency.
Thank you. And I would think, an island such as Puerto Rico would be a classic example of solar opportunity. That would just be a natural go-to.
Yes.
Mr. Stensby, Ms. Santiago's testimony mentions a backlog of more than 5,000 systems on the island waiting to implement solar technology. So what are you folks doing to address this backlog, and what challenges remain?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, Senator. In fact, when we began on June the 1st, it was a very long backlog, and as we pointed out, some people have been waiting for as long as 2 years. We made substantial efforts in reducing that backlog. We're processing new solar connections more than 7 times what PREPA had been able to do prior to that, and we believe by the end of this year we'll have completely eliminated the backlog. And I think, LUMA, people are trying to portray us as anti-solar, and it's absolutely not true. We just released, in fact, a hosting map on our website so that people who are interested in solar can more easily connect and make decisions about the solar investments. So we want to be very clear. We're supportive of rooftop solar, and we're doing everything in our power to support that.
Yeah, and I would hope that includes storage. And with that, my time is up. And so, Mr. Chair, I yield back, and thank you so much for the hearing.
Thank you, Congressman. Congressman yields. Let me now recognize Mr. McClintock. Sir, you're recognized. Mr. McClintock, sir, you're recognized. If not, let me go to the next colleague on the list. Representative Tiffany, you're recognized for 5 minutes. And we'll hold that other for Mr. McClintock if and when he comes forward. Representative Tiffany? Okay, let me now recognize Congressman Garcia. Sir, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Electricity, of course, is something that many of us take for granted, but for people in Puerto Rico, it's a matter of life and death. Hundreds of thousands on the island are currently experiencing outages lasting several days, all while already paying twice as much for electricity than what most of us in the States pay. We're seeing classes suspended, people being forced to throw out food, disruptions in medical services, and a family in Aguadilla losing everything after a power surge burned their house. This would not be acceptable anywhere else, so why do we allow it to happen in Puerto Rico? Last year, this committee held a hearing to preemptively address concerns around the privatization of Puerto Rico's power grid, and yet a year later, with Puerto Rico on the brink of power supply crisis, we have this situation. A question for Mr. Fontanez. We heard earlier that as of June 1st, more than 3,000 ex-PREPA employees transferred to other government agencies. Why did P3 allow for thousands of PREPA employees to be transferred rather than to work for LUMA?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question and for the opportunity to address this topic. The way Act 120 is established, what the law required was that we allow the PREPA employees the opportunity to make the decision that they would like to make in terms of whether they wanted to join a private entity or they wanted to remain within the government of Puerto Rico. During the transition period, we did everything within our power to try to provide information to the employees at PREPA so that they could weigh in on what was better for them in particular, and they could make the decision they would like to make. So at the end of the day, most of those employees decided to stay with the government than to join PREPA. I would have to say that, than to join LUMA, I'm sorry. I would have to say that, in my opinion, that it is a shame. LUMA provided better salaries, the same or better benefits than most of these employees.
Thank you for your answer. I just, it feels like it's really wasteful to let skilled electrical workers serve as drivers or security workers, especially at this time of Puerto Rico's energy crisis. Question for Mr. Stensby. Consumers have reported difficulties with accessing LUMA's customer service, especially when widespread outages occur. How have employees at call centers been trained and resourced to respond to these events? And do you feel that LUMA's customer service operation is currently meeting the demand for consumers?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Congressman. What I can tell you is that we trained ahead of service commencement a very large number of call center agents. We now have 4 call centers around Puerto Rico. It was important to us that they were in Puerto Rico. We have almost 10 times as many agents as PREPA had as we moved into the transition. What we are seeing is a very large volume of calls. We've rolled out a number of digital channels for people, but we are seeing large numbers of calls. And frankly, we attribute that to the fact that we are answering the phone. Our average answer time is in approximately the 10-minute mark.
And
we're beginning to fix the system.
Forgive me for reclaiming my time. Is it adequate, sir? Yes or no?
Yes, for today it is, sir. Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Santiago, I want to make sure you get a word in. how has LUMA engaged with community stakeholders prior to and following its acquisition of the T&D system? Do you feel that LUMA has sufficiently responded to the questions and concerns of community members? And you have about 35 seconds.
Okay. No, not at all. Not before, not during, not now has LUMA communicated with communities. In fact, we're working with a group of 10 community organizations in the LUMA performance metrics case. And LUMA this week said that they did not have to answer questions about the emergency response plan. Now, we have plants here in Salinas, Puerto Rico, that, for example, the Aguirre Power Complex is the largest electrical complex in Puerto Rico, that surrounding communities need to know what the emergency response plan is for that that infrastructure and the transmission system that comes out of that infrastructure. So LUMA is not responding at all to community requests for information.
Thank you, Ms. Santiago. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Let me ask the ranking member, Ms. Gonzalez Colon, is there any members on your side?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I can see Mr. Overnolty that is connected as well as Mr.
Does he
Moore.
seek to be recognized on that?
Yes.
Mr. Overnolty, you're recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses on this really critical topic for the people of Puerto Rico. I had a question for Mr. Gill. I'd like to follow up on the line of inquiry that Congresswoman Velasquez was pursuing earlier. Recently, there was an outage on the island of Puerto Rico that was tied to several of the power plants going down because of cloggage of intakes for the generators with brown seaweed. And on Friday afternoon, there was a protest by hundreds of Puerto Ricans in front of the governor's mansion against these outages. And many of those protesters were angry with LUMA. But my question to you is, should they be angry with LUMA or should they be angry with PEPRA, given the fact that that PEPRA is responsible for generation and LUMA is just responsible for distribution?
Congressman, actually, at that time, they could be mad with both. It was a matter of generation with as you call it, the sargassum or the seaweed. In that sense, those filters already being procured in that scenario, they're extremely expensive. There was something that it shouldn't happen, but at the same time, there have been other outages not related to generation that sort of like that mix of it actually creates have been created the emotions around there, and obviously other political motivations and the opposition to it. It's fueling that fire.
Okay, so what could LUMA have done about that particular outage?
In terms of the generation, I mean, like they don't have any type of control in the generation. They do have the dispatching of it, of the generation by itself, meaning with that, they start transmitting and distributing amounts. So when it's related to outages because of transformers, substations, or any other particular fault wiring or something like that, it's related to the T&D. When it's related to generation by itself, any machine that breaks or whatever, it's related to us in PREPA.
Right. Okay. So talking about that outage in particular, can you give us kind of a layman's explanation of what happened with the seaweed and why it caused such a problem at those two plants?
Well, basically, I mean, let me transfer and to give you the proper answer and the correct answer. Mr. Colon is the expert in generation, so he will take that question.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Congressman. As Fernando explained, what happened over there was that a high amount of seaweed or sargassum entered the intake of water that are used in the power plant for condense the steam that is using for move the turbine. The reason for that was that we have 5 sets of screens that are using for filter or prevent those seaweed to enter the channels that are tied to the condensers. But at that time when this happened, all of the 5 filters failed, and that was the main reason that led to the shutdown of the units on Aguirre, and also to reduce the amount of energy that one of the generation can produce. And LUMA doesn't have anything to do with that. It was
Okay, now, are those intents, are they at surface level or are they below the surface?
Both, but the majority of the seaweed was on the surface, but also are below the water level.
Right, and as I understand it, these are large floating mats of brown seaweed, is that correct?
Yes.
So, I mean, I'm just, and again, I'm a layman, I'm not an expert, but why even allow those mats of seaweed to come close to the inlets? I mean, couldn't you just take some surface watercraft and go collect that or push it away, or erect a floating boom or something if you knew that was a hazard?
Well, actually, that was a failure from our people in the Aguirre power station. Actually, the power plant has watercraft and equipment to prevent those seaweed to get close to the intake, but they also have lack of personnel to conduct that kind of maintenance service for this kind of process, and all of this lead to what happened. And we are now taking the actions required to prevent that. Since that time, the unit returned to service without any problem with the sargassum and seaweed, and we are putting all of our efforts to prevent that to happen again, even that we doesn't have the equipment, the new equipment that is needed to replace the broken ones.
Okay.
Gentleman yields. Let me turn to the next. Thank you for the questions. Gentleman yields. Let me recognize Representative Talib for her questions. Representative, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm so sorry. I've been having technical difficulty today on my laptop, so please bear with me. Thank you so much for holding this important hearing. While Puerto Rico may be very far from my district, the problems we're talking about seem so familiar. I mean, this summer, hundreds of thousands of people in Metro Detroit area in my community lost power, some for as many as 6 to 7 days, Chairman. Our investor-owned, shareholder-centered electrical utility company called DTE has raised rates by nearly $1 billion in the last decade, while having some of the worst reliability and performance in the whole nation. So incredibly important for us to understand the connection between many of our districts and what is happening to the Puerto Rican people. In the last several weeks, numerous press accounts have emerged about the impact, as you all know, of the ongoing unreliable but substandard electrical service for Puerto Rican residents. These include reports of constant and extended outages that we've been talking about, lasting more than 24 to 48 hours in communities with many elderly residents and residents with chronic illnesses. And we all, as members of Congress, have experienced and heard from our residents about how, their health and everything is connected to the access to the electricity. I know the mayor of San Juan is spending nearly $1 million to buy generators for water pumps so that power outages do not continue to result in water outages. And the Secretary of Commerce and Economic Development has denounced the impact of poor service on economic development and so forth. We heard reports of power surges regularly destroying people's appliances. You all know that, even causing house fires, like an incident of a family that lost everything. And Aguadilla, after power surge, burned their house down. So, Mr. Chairman, we know that this terrible level of service isn't acceptable for the Puerto Rican people. It isn't acceptable in Michigan either, and it shouldn't be acceptable anywhere in our country or in our world. Privatizing electrical service is a disaster for the Puerto Rican people. because private utilities serve investors, not the public. I'm going to say that again. Private utilities serve their investors, not the public. Reliability has worsened when it became private. And so we need to basically make sure that we're speaking that truth as we talk about these issues. So Mr. Stensby, as of June 1st, more than 3,000 ex-PERMA employees transferred to other government agencies rather than work for LUMA. How many workers and crews does LUMA have assigned to the municipalities of Aguadilla and is it Ponce?
As I testified earlier, we have 900 employees that are in the field today. I can't tell you precisely how many are assigned to those two municipalities, Congresswoman.
Yeah, so they left LUMA. How many left LUMA?
How many left LUMA?
So more than 3,000 ex-PERMA employees transferred. You said 3,000, and then they left. You said 900 went to the municipalities?
No, so I think it's a mischaracterization. LUMA recruited, and for an employee, as Mr. Fontanez had testified, for an employee that was working for the government of Puerto Rico, they had a choice to join LUMA or take a transfer to another agency within the government.
And 3,000 of them said, we're going to leave LUMA. Okay, what is the average crew response time for outages?
The average response time across the most recent month is in round numbers in the 5 or 6 hour time frame.
How many complaints has LUMA Energy received regarding voltage, what they call fluctuations damaging home appliances?
I don't have that specific number with me.
I would love if the committee can follow up and get that information. How much money has LUMA Energy received so far under its contract? And again, I apologize if this was answered before, but I would like to know for the
LUMA Energy during this interim period until the point in time when PREPA would eventually move out of bankruptcy earns approximately $7 million a month.
Okay. How many LUMA employees executives earn over $200,000 and how many earn over $500,000?
I think I was asked that question earlier, but
and you didn't want to answer, right?
I'm not able to disclose employee salaries.
Yeah. If you want to get in the business of providing a public good and for the federal government to subsidize it or for us to play a part in it, then you understand that those salaries are also the public salary. Do you understand? So just know that it doesn't make sense that you don't want to reveal that. You don't even have to tell me the names of it. I think Velasquez and I are just curious, how many of your employees earn over 200,000 and how many of them earn 500,000? I don't need names. I just want to know how many. So if you can follow up and talk to your legal folks, I think they'll come back and tell you that that should be actually transparent and open. Do you know what the median household income is in Puerto Rico? Sir?
No, I do not, Congressman.
Yeah, it's $20,000. According to the Census Bureau, $20,000. So LUMA has received millions of dollars and stands to receive billions more in an attempt to privatize the grid in Puerto Rico over the next 15 years. But the last 4 months have been a disaster for the people of Puerto Rico, and privatization I know will only worsen it. So I just want you, sir, to understand that if you're going to serve the people, you should know what the median income is. You should know what the impact is. And the fact of the matter is you failed them just alone in the last 4 months. So please understand that my frustration with all of this is because they deserve to make sure that they have access to something that is very much a lifeline to medical issues they're struggling with, being able to provide for their families, of course, food, all those things, appliances, everything is so connected to that. So with that, Chairman, I yield. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lady Yields. Let me call again on my colleague's Representative McClintock, if he is available now. If not, Representative Tiffany, if he is available. If the recognized, either or. If not, let me go to Representative Espaillat for his 5 minutes. Sir, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I want to ask a very simple question. One really like an honest yes and no answer. Since LUMA assumed responsibility have power outages and other service disruptions increased? Mr. Hill?
Sorry for, we don't have the actual data for that. It's something that is related to LUMA, and LUMA should answer like the amount that they have before and the amount that the outages that they have since June 1st.
Mr. Standby from LUMA, since you took control or responsibility, have outages and service disruption increased?
The frequency of outages has gone down, sir, and in some months, the duration of outages has gone up.
Have service complaints increased from customers, from your customers?
The calls that we receive have absolutely increased, and I believe that's fundamentally because we're actually beginning to make a difference, and people are now reporting issues in order for us to correct them.
So you're saying that outages have decreased while service complaints have increased? Usually it's the other way around. Usually service complaints increase when you have problems, when you have outages or service disruptions. But what you're saying is that service complaints have decreased while rather that the outages have decreased and service complaints have increased.
What I'm saying, Senator, is that you know, with PREPA, I think people had a certain level of expectation, and now that LUMA has arrived, those expectations have risen, and people are indeed engaging with us, and they're beginning to see some action. We're replacing more poles, we're improving services, and that in itself is causing increased calls and interest in it's hopes, or it's helping people understand that we can and we are making a difference.
So you're saying that responsiveness to these complaints have declined or have increased?
I'm saying the responsiveness has increased. We just completed our most recent JD Power survey, and customer satisfaction is actually slightly up from before June 1st.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, I just want to state that our records at our office have received information to show that, in fact, customer services complaints have increased and responsiveness to the complaints have declined. Now, I have another question, which is going to go to regarding the renewable energy transition.
And how are they're handling things. But in that sense, I feel comfortable with the pace that we have right now. that first RFP already notified or the line of people that can basically get a contract. It might be go to 12. And obviously, next week, actually, we'll issue the second one and so forth. So it's about keeping that rhythm and that into that direction in order for us to be able to produce the public policy goals of that 40% for 2025-2030.
Mr. Chairman, let me just, for the record, state my concern regarding these delays and the potential that other interests may be involved in causing these long-standing delays. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Let me now ask once again Representative Tiffany or Representative McClintock, minority side, if they're present, either or can be recognized. If not, let me go to the gentleperson from California, chair of this committee's Oversight and Investigations. Chair Porter, you're recognized.
Thank you so much. We're here to talk about a coal ash plant run by LUMA. And I have a picture of it here, and you can see a mountain of coal ash right here. And spoiler alert, it is highly toxic and poisoning residents of the nearby community of Guayama. Mr. Stensby, you're here today, and despite concerns about staffing and competence that my colleagues and I had earlier this summer and still have, LUMA began operating Puerto Rico's electricity system called a grid on June 1. We're glad that you took Congress up on its invitation to appear today and testify this time. I wanted to ask you, how would you characterize LUMA's transition to managing Puerto Rico's electrical grid so far, with 1 being a total disaster and 10 being a remarkable success?
I think, as I set out, Congresswoman, it has certainly been a challenging transition. There have been many factors at play, but when I look at it on balance, I would give us, a B. I think we have a lot to do.
Okay, so 1 to 10, 1 to 10, you would give yourself like a 6?
I'd give myself I'd give us a 7, considering what we've
7. Okay. How many blackouts, I know this has been covered, but how many blackouts have been reported since LUMA took over on June 1?
The system has a very large number of outages, Congresswoman, both
Can you even count them? Is it so big you can't even keep track of them all?
There are outages every single day, Congresswoman.
Every single day. So if you're having trouble doing this, and there's voltage spikes, destroyed appliances, house fires, complaints about customer service, why should LUMA be allowed to continue to manage the plant if it's not actually delivering electricity?
Two things. I want to be very clear. The picture that you showed, LUMA has nothing to do with the AES coal plant. Our job is to operate the electric system.
Do you not get energy from this plant that you then move along the grid?
Puerto Rico receives energy from that plant, yes.
And then you move it along the grid?
That energy is flowed through the grid to customers, yes.
Okay. I want to talk about customer service. How many customer service reps did you have on June 1?
I don't have the exact number, but we
How many
have a
today?
large number. Sorry?
You have a large number of customer service reps, which is good because you have a large number of blackouts. How many customer service reps do you have today?
We have more than 350 agents, and in addition, many more people that are customer service people.
And how many experienced linemen do you have today?
I think, as I described earlier,
900?
the way that PREPA would describe them, we have more than 900 people in the field today.
Okay. I want to turn to last hearing. We had a witness describing that his aunt is dead, his wife and daughter might be dying. A doctor testified about terrible illnesses. Is the AES plant worth running, in your opinion, given the lost lives and serious illnesses?
As I say, I think the conversation about AES is not a conversation for LUMA. LUMA's job is to transform the transmission and distribution system, Senator.
Are you equally able to transmit energy that comes from renewable sources?
Yes, and I think as I testified earlier, Congresswoman, we've been working hard to reduce the weighting and connecting new renewable resources as we speak.
And so you commit to doing everything in your power to transition to renewables?
We are very supportive of renewables.
Do you think Puerto Rico is on track to meet its renewable goals?
Once again, I think it's important that people understand LUMA's role is to operate the transmission and distribution system and rebuild that system.
I'm concerned because we heard testimony today that you're delaying ready-to-go rooftop solar and storage installations, and there's a backlog of these systems that are still waiting to be connected. Why is that if you're so committed to clean energy?
No, I think that's a mischaracterization. I think my testimony actually said we are accelerating those systems. We're moving at 7 times the pace that they were being moved at before we came into operation. We're confident there'll be no backlog by the end of the year, and we just posted hosting maps on our website to support more renewables.
How long do you think it will be until LUMA can deliver the energy in a consistent and reliable way with blackouts that are comparable to what we see in the United States and what you saw at your prior employer?
I believe that it's going to take many years to transform all of Puerto Rico's electric system. It's going to require the FEMA funding, and it requires a complete overhaul. It took decades to get where we are today, and it's going to get better month by month by month, but frankly, it's going to take many years to get a world-class electric system here in Puerto Rico.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. Representative Gonzalez Colon, is there any member on your side of the dais that wishes to be recognized?
Not at this time, sir.
Thank you. Let me just go over some quick questions and a comment. Mr. Stensby, according to economic analysis and experts at the University of Puerto Rico, the cost of electricity is one of the expenses straining most Puerto Rican citizens and small businesses. When can we expect, and it follows up on a question, that LUMA's control of PREPA's transmission and distribution system is going to lead to a reduced cost, increased reliability for service for the consumers and the people of Puerto Rico? When's the end game on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And what I want to say is, we submitted our plans to the PREB, and the PREB has approved those investment plans. I do believe it will get better each and every month. But as I said, it is going to take a number of years for that overall reliability through reinvestment to get the system here in Puerto Rico to what many people in the mainland U.S. would expect from their power system.
Thank you. The question is this next question is for Mr. Otanes or Mr. Laboy. Will LUMA be the sole control of the $9.5 billion federal cost share payment that FEMA will provide for rebuilding the grid? That's one question. Also, will LUMA be able, on their own, to select off-island contractors such as their parent company or other affiliates to complete the work to modernize the grid?
So, Mr. Chairman, for the first question, it is very important to state that the only administrator and the recipient of the federal funds obligated by FEMA for the permanent work for the electrical grid is the Core 3. We are the responsible entity. It's stated in the FEMA state agreements, according to the Stafford Act, federal regulations, and we are the entity that is responsible to manage.
So effectively, LUMA cannot make those kinds of contracting decisions, all that, without your concurrence, or if that, right?
every project which needs to be approved by FEMA.
No, I'm
as
saying
the-
they want to hire a contractor that has to come to you, and it's your approval that drives that or not? That's my question.
LUMA and PREPA has to follow the procurement requirements according to federal, local, and state. And when we receive a reimbursement request, we verify and validate that each project has been procured according to federal, state, and local requirements, and we validate 100% according to those FEMA requirements.
Yeah, let me just, as we conclude the meeting, thank the witnesses, thank the members for the questions. Many of the questions that I had developed were asked by other members, and so redundancy is not something we want to encourage. But I do want to say a couple of things that were made, and I think and members made the point. I think somebody said that the issue of what happened with the grid and the power loss and blackouts in Texas during the winter was as a result of trying to green the energy grids too soon. Well, other more informed conclusions were that it was a fully privatized energy delivery system, unregulated, and with limited oversight and control on the part of the state government. And I certainly wouldn't want the federal government, with the investment that it's making to the Puerto Rican people, to be in the position as the Texas legislature and their administration are, of not providing oversight and essentially deregulating their energy distribution system, which many, I believe, caused the outages. But anyway, the other point is that was made today is that I think we need some answers on the two questions: the earmark issue for rooftop and storage for individuals and for neighborhoods regarding renewable energy, and the development of those microgrids to deal with that. I think we need to look at that and follow up with FEMA as to the ability to indicate that, and further look at the contract, at the agreement with LUMA and PREPA and all the responsible parties. I think that needs to be looked at much deeper, and some questions came up today. You know, the issue is reliability and dealing with the urgency of having reliable power to the consumers in Puerto Rico, period. Nobody denies that. And there is going to have to be some patches, there has to be some corrections, some improvements, some repairs in order to guarantee that during a transition. But transition is the goal. It's the goal under public law in Puerto Rico, and it's goal under the present administration in the White House. And as such, none of this, I think, accountability, transparency with this contract is essential, so that we don't get into foot dragging, we don't get into double dealing, and we don't get into preferences that take away from meeting that transition goal. Because I think you can do both, chew gum and walk. And to constantly use the excuse of a system that is not up to standards, which we all know as the reasons we can't make the transition, I think it's a false choice. So we're going to follow up. Members have indicated some follow-ups around investigative issues and also in terms of FEMA. And the other issue, we will be forwarding to LUMA some specific requests in terms of information. In the past, they have said that that's proprietary and they cannot provide it to Congress. We will issue that. We hope they're responsive. If they're not, then we'll proceed to the next step to compel that information to come forward. With that, let me thank all the witnesses, thank my colleague, the ranking member, Ms. Gonzalez Colon, and the meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Thank
afternoon.
you.
Thank you.